Veltar stood before the massive viewing screen in the Corvani command center. The stars looked cold and distant, just like they always did. He had seen many worlds fall to the hegemony. This would be no different. "Observer Veltar," said the deep voice behind him. Warmaster Theclon approached with heavy steps. His forearms moved in the formal greeting pattern. "Your new assignment is ready." Veltar turned and gave the proper response. His own forearms moved smoothly through the ancient ritual. "I serve the hegemony's glory." "Good." Theclon activated a holographic display. A small yellow star appeared, surrounded by several planets. "This is the Sol system. The third planet holds a species called humans. They have spread to 30 worlds in nearby systems." Veltar studied the data streams flowing past the image. The numbers were laughable. 30 worlds? That is barely a colony group. Exactly. Theclon's mandibles clicked in amusement. They use primitive fusion drives. Their weapons are simple kinetics and explosives. Their shields are basic electromagnetic fields. The data confirmed everything. These humans had technology that was thousands of years behind the Corvani. Veltar had documented the defeat of species far more advanced than this. "How long do you estimate for complete surrender?" 3 days. Perhaps 4 if they are particularly stubborn. Theclon gestured to another display showing the massive Corvani fleet. "We are sending 200 warships. More than enough to glass every human world if needed." Veltar nodded. Standard procedure. The hegemony always used overwhelming force. It was more efficient than long campaigns. "What is my specific role?" "Document everything. The Council wants a complete record of human military capabilities, social structure, and surrender protocols. Standard observation mission." Theclon paused, "Though I doubt there will be much to document. Primitive species usually surrender after seeing our first fleet." The assignment seemed simple enough. Veltar had done this hundreds of times before. He gathered his equipment and prepared for deployment to the observation ship. The vessel was small and completely cloaked. He would position it near the human homeworld and watch the conquest unfold. 3 days later, Veltar floated in the observation bay above Earth's moon. The planet below was blue and green, covered in water and plant life. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful if Veltar allowed himself such thoughts. But beauty did not matter when documenting military defeat. His sensors detected the human ships immediately. They were crude but functional. Most seemed to be converted civilian vessels with weapons attached. The largest warship was barely half the size of a Corvani frigate. Veltar began his initial report. Human fleet composition: approximately 300 vessels of various sizes. Technology level indicates early space-age civilization. Weapons appear to be projectile-based with some energy components. No evidence of dark matter manipulation or quantum shielding. The human ships moved in loose formations around their planet. Veltar could see they were trying to establish defensive positions. It was touching in a way, like watching small animals try to protect their nest from a forest fire. On the planet's surface, his long-range sensors picked up massive activity. Factories were working at full capacity. Military bases were expanding rapidly. Civilian populations were being evacuated from major cities. The humans were preparing for war, even though they had to know it was hopeless. Admiral Hyun-woo commanded the human fleet from a ship called Freedom's Shield. Veltar intercepted the communications between human vessels. The admiral was calm and professional as he gave orders. There was no panic in his voice, which surprised Veltar. Most species showed clear signs of fear when facing the hegemony. "All ships maintain defensive grid pattern 7, Admiral Hyun-woo said over the comm channels. "Remember, we are not just protecting Earth. We are buying time for the outer colonies to prepare." Veltar made a note. The humans seemed to understand strategic thinking. They knew they could not win, but they were still trying to achieve secondary objectives. This showed more intelligence than many species displayed. Dr. Somin was leading the human diplomatic efforts from a space station near Mars. She had been sending messages toward the edge of the system, where long-range sensors had detected the approaching Corvani fleet. Her messages were formal and respectful, offering to discuss peaceful solutions. "Unknown vessels approaching our system," she broadcast repeatedly. "This is Dr. Somin of the Terran Federation. We welcome contact with other civilizations. Please respond if you wish to establish diplomatic relations." Veltar almost felt sorry for her. The hegemony had stopped responding to diplomatic overtures centuries ago. It was more efficient to simply demand surrender and move forward with conquest. Still, he recorded her messages for the archives. The Corvani fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 200 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. Each ship was the size of a small city, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The sight should have sent the humans into immediate panic. Instead, Veltar watched something unexpected happen. The human ships did not flee. They did not immediately surrender. Instead, they tightened their defensive formations and began broadcasting what sounded like music on several frequencies. All human vessels, this is Admiral Hyun-woo. Today we make our stand. Whatever happens, remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. For Earth, for humanity, for the future. The human fleet responded with a chorus of acknowledgments. Veltar detected elevated stress hormones in the intercepted biodata, but also something else, something his sensors labeled as determination, mixed with what could only be described as excitement. Warmaster Theklan's voice boomed across all frequencies. Humans of the Sol system, you are surrounded by the forces of the Corvani hegemony. You will surrender immediately or face total destruction. You have 1 hour to respond, Dr. Somin replied within minutes. Warmaster Theklan, I am Dr. Somin, speaking for the Terran Federation. We do not wish for war, but we will not surrender our freedom. If you insist on conquest, you will face resistance. Veltar checked his data again. The humans had to know they were outgunned by thousands to one. Their combined fleet could not significantly damage even a single Corvani battleship. Yet they spoke of resistance as if they had a chance of victory. This was not following the normal pattern. By now, most species would be begging for mercy or trying to negotiate surrender terms. The humans seemed to be actually preparing to fight. As the hour deadline approached, Veltar received a transmission from an unexpected source. Someone on the human flagship was sending a tight beam message directly to his hidden observation post. To whoever is watching and recording this, came Admiral Hyun-woo's voice. Know that humanity chose this path freely. We die as we lived, with our eyes open and our backs straight. Veltar stared at his instruments in confusion. How had the humans detected his cloaked ship? Their sensors were far too primitive. Yet somehow they knew he was there. They knew someone was watching, and they wanted their final words recorded. The hour was almost up. Veltar prepared to document humanity's last stand, expecting it to be brief and futile. But deep in his analytical mind, a small doubt began to grow. These humans were not behaving like any species he had observed before. Perhaps this assignment would be more interesting than he had thought. The deadline passed in silence. Veltar watched the display screen showing both fleets. The Corvani ships held their positions at the edge of the system, weapons charged and ready. The human ships remained in their defensive formation around Earth, like tiny insects protecting their hive. Warmaster Theklan's patience had ended. Humans, your time is up. Prepare for conquest. The first wave of Corvani ships began moving toward the inner system. Veltar had seen this pattern many times. The advanced scouts would engage and destroy the primitive fleet in minutes. Then the main force would occupy the planet and begin processing the survivors. But as the Corvani scouts approached Mars, something unexpected happened. The humans did not wait for the enemy to reach them. Instead, a small group of human ships broke from the main formation and accelerated toward the approaching Corvani vessels. Captain Bora commanded the lead human ship, called Determination. Veltar intercepted her communications with her crew. Engineering, I need everything the reactor can give us. Weapons, prepare for close engagement. All hands, it has been an honor serving with you. Veltar checked his calculations. The human ship was accelerating far beyond what its design should allow. Either their reactor was about to explode, or they had found a way to push their technology past its limits. Both possibilities were dangerous. Engineer Wanho's voice crackled over the comm system. Captain, I've bypassed all the safety systems. We're running at 200% capacity. The ship will hold together for maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes is all we need, Captain Bora replied. Remember, we're not trying to win this fight. We're trying to learn how they fight. This made no sense to Veltar. Every species fought to win. Fighting to learn was illogical, especially when learning meant certain death. Yet the human ships continued their impossible acceleration toward the vastly superior Corvani scouts. The first engagement lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Veltar documented everything with clinical precision. The Corvani energy weapons should have destroyed the human ships instantly. Their shields should have been useless against dark matter cannons. Instead, Veltar watched Captain Bora's ship do something that violated several laws of physics. When the Corvani fired their first salvo, the human ship somehow dispersed the energy beam using rotating shield frequencies. The technique was crude and inefficient, but it worked long enough for the humans to return fire. The human weapons were primitive kinetic rounds, essentially metal slugs fired at high velocity. They should have been harmless against Corvani armor, but engineer Wanho had modified them in ways that Veltar's sensors could barely understand. The rounds seemed to phase through the outer armor layers before exploding inside the ships. 2 Corvani scouts suffered significant damage before the humans were finally destroyed. But as determination died, Captain Bora transmitted her ship's sensor data to the remaining human fleet. She had learned how Corvani shields worked, and she had found a weakness. Veltar studied the data in confusion. The humans had traded their most advanced ship and their best crew to gain information about Corvani defensive systems. This was not how civilized warfare worked. Battles were fought to gain territory or resources, not to conduct experiments. War Master Theclon was equally confused, though he showed it as anger. How did primitive kinetics penetrate our armor? Run a full analysis of the wreckage. The analysis revealed Wanho's modifications. The human engineer had somehow created phase shift rounds using their primitive technology. The rounds existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously, allowing them to bypass traditional defenses. It was brilliant in its simplicity, and completely impossible according to established science. Impossible or not, it worked. Theclon growled to his tactical officers. Adjust all shield frequencies to compensate for phase shift attacks, but the humans had already moved to their next experiment. Dr. Somin was coordinating a new defensive strategy from her. Stationed near Mars, she had analyzed the Corvani shield adjustments and was developing countermeasures. All ships. This is Dr. Somin. We've identified patterns in their defensive systems. They adapt quickly, but they adapt predictably. We can use this. Veltar watched the human fleet implement something he had never seen before. Instead of adapting their own defenses, they were deliberately triggering Corvani adaptations and then exploiting the predictable responses. It was like watching someone play a game where they won by forcing their opponent to make better moves. The second engagement was larger. 50 Corvani ships faced the entire human fleet. The outcome should have been a massacre. Veltar prepared to document the end of human resistance. Instead, he witnessed something that would haunt his analysis reports for years to come. The humans had turned their entire fleet into a single experimental weapon. Admiral Hyunwoo coordinated the attack from Freedom's shield. All ships execute pattern Delta. Remember, we succeed by failing better than they expect. The human ships attacked in waves, each wave using different tactics and technologies. The first wave used conventional weapons and was quickly destroyed, but their sacrifice allowed the second wave to approach closer before being eliminated. The third wave got closer still. By the seventh wave, human ships were ramming Corvani vessels directly. Veltar watched in horror as brave crews deliberately crashed their ships into enemy hulls, overloading their reactors at the moment of impact. It was madness, but it was effective madness. Engineer Wanho had equipped many ships with reactor overload systems. When a human ship was about to be destroyed, the crew could trigger a controlled fusion explosion. The blasts were small compared to Corvani weapons, but they happened inside enemy shield perimeters. This is not warfare, Veltar muttered to himself. This is organized suicide with tactical objectives. But the organized suicide was working. The Corvani fleet had lost 12 ships to an enemy that should not have been able to damage a single vessel. More importantly, the humans were learning faster than the Corvani could adapt. Dr. Somin broadcast another message to the remaining human ships. We've identified their command frequency patterns. Their ships communicate using quantum entanglement networks. If we can disrupt the entanglement. She never finished the explanation. A Corvani particle beam destroyed her station in a flash of superheated plasma, but her final data transmission reached the human fleet, and they immediately began implementing her discovery. The humans started broadcasting random quantum noise on frequencies they had no business knowing about. Veltar watched Corvani communication systems begin to falter as their quantum networks became unstable. Somehow the primitive humans had figured out how to jam technology that was theoretically impossible to jam. War Master Theclon ordered a full retreat to the outer system. Regroup and analyze these new tactics. This is not proceeding according to plan. Veltar agreed completely. Nothing about this engagement matched any previous pattern in his database. The humans had lost the battle, losing most of their fleet in the process. But they had also inflicted impossible damage and gained tactical information that should have taken decades of study to acquire. As the Corvani fleet regrouped, Veltar intercepted human communications from their surviving ships. Instead of despair or surrender discussions, he heard planning sessions for the next engagement. The humans were already working on new tactics based on what they had learned. Admiral Hyunwoo's voice was calm and determined. We hurt them today. We proved they can be hurt. That's more than any other species has managed. Sir, came a young voice, probably a junior officer. We lost 80% of the fleet. Yes, the admiral replied, and they lost 6% of theirs. At this rate, we'll run out of ships in 5 more battles. They'll run out of ships in 20 more battles. Anyone want to guess what happens in the intervening battles? Veltar ran the calculations and felt something like fear. If the humans continued to improve at their current rate, while inflicting consistent damage on the Corvani fleet, the mathematics became very disturbing. The humans would indeed run out of ships first, but the final battles might not be as one-sided as they appeared. The most disturbing part was that the humans seemed to understand this calculation. They were fighting a war of learning, trading immediate losses for long-term advantages. It was a strategy that only made sense if they valued the survival of their species more than the survival of any individual. Veltar began to wonder if he truly understood what he was observing. These humans were not fighting like any species in his experience. They were fighting like something entirely new, and they were just getting started. 3 weeks had passed since the first major engagement. Veltar had expected the war to be over by now, with human worlds under Corvani control, and the survivors being processed for integration into the hegemony. Instead, he found himself documenting the most frustrating military campaign in Corvani history. The humans had done something unexpected after losing most of their fleet. Instead of surrendering, they had scattered their remaining ships and begun what they called guerrilla warfare. Small groups of human vessels now attacked Corvani supply lines, communication relays, and isolated ships throughout the system. War Master Theclon was learning to hate these tactics. They refuse to engage our main fleet. They strike at targets of no strategic value, then disappear before we can respond. Veltar had been studying the human attack patterns. Actually, War Master, their targets do have strategic value. They are systematically degrading our operational efficiency. Explain. Veltar called up a tactical display. Each attack forces us to divert ships for patrol duties. Every damaged supply ship requires escorts. Every destroyed communication relay creates gaps in our coordination network. They are not trying to defeat us directly. They are trying to make commanding us impossible. The War Master's mandibles clicked in frustration. No civilized species fights this way. When faced with superior force, they negotiate surrender terms or accept client status. They do not engage in this chaos. But chaos seemed to be exactly what the humans wanted. General Taeyang was coordinating the new strategy from a hidden base on one of Jupiter's moons. Veltar had finally managed to intercept some of his communications with the scattered human forces. Remember, we are not trying to win battles, General Taeyang told his commanders. We are trying to make them lose the war. Every day this conflict continues. Every resource they waste chasing us. Every ship they have to assign to patrol duty makes them weaker. Captain Bo-Ra had survived the destruction of Determination and now commanded a small group of converted civilian ships. Her new vessel was called Defiance, and it perfectly represented the human approach to warfare. The ship had been a cargo freighter before the war. Now it carried experimental weapons that engineer Wan-Ho designed from mining equipment and industrial fabricators. This is insane, Wan-Ho said during one of their planning sessions. We're attacking warships with converted mining lasers and jury-rigged missile pods. Insane is good, Captain Bo-Ra replied. Sane warfare is predictable. Predictable warfare gets you conquered by superior technology. Insane warfare makes the enemy adapt to crazy. And you cannot adapt to crazy because crazy keeps changing. Veltar had to admit the logic was sound. even if it violated every principle of civilized conflict. The humans had realized they could not compete with Corvani technology, so they had stopped trying to compete. Instead, they were forcing the Corvani to compete with human unpredictability. Dr. Eunji was leading the research efforts on Earth. Her teams were working around the clock to develop new weapons and tactics. Veltar intercepted reports of experiments that seemed more like desperation than science. They were building bombs from agricultural equipment, turning construction robots into assault units, and somehow creating computer viruses that affected Corvani quantum processors. How are they generating quantum viruses with their primitive computers? Veltar asked himself while reviewing the intercepted data. Their technology should not be capable of affecting our systems at all. The answer came from an unexpected source. Hanul was a civilian engineer who had volunteered for the war effort. She was working in one of Dr. Yoonji's research facilities, and her personal journal entries revealed the human approach to technological problems. Day 15 of Project Impossible, Hanul wrote. Dr. Yoonji says we cannot build quantum computers, so we cannot affect quantum systems. But Wonho pointed out that we do not need to build quantum computers. We just need to make quantum systems think we have quantum computers. Veltar read the entry 3 times before understanding the implications. The humans were not actually generating quantum viruses. They were creating false quantum signatures that confused Corvani systems into responding as if they were under quantum attack. It was technological bluffing on a scale that should not have been possible. The technique was spreading throughout the human resistance. Small human ships now carried devices that made them appear much larger on Corvani sensors. Human communication signals were disguised to look like Corvani command frequencies. Even human missiles were programmed to mimic the quantum signatures of Corvani weapons. War Master Theclon was becoming increasingly frustrated with these deception tactics. Our sensors cannot distinguish between real threats and human illusions. Our communication networks are flooded with false signals. Our automated defense systems are firing on phantom targets. The situation worsened when the humans began what they called psychological warfare. They had somehow learned about Corvani culture and were using that knowledge as a weapon. Human ships now broadcast recordings of Corvani surrender ceremonies, religious hymns, and even personal messages from Corvani prisoners. Veltar intercepted one such broadcast. It was a message from a captured Corvani officer, speaking in perfect Corvani formal language. To my brothers in the fleet, I have seen the humans fight. They do not fight for conquest or glory. They fight for something we do not understand. They fight for those who will come after them. How do we defeat an enemy that considers death a tactical victory? The psychological impact on the Corvani fleet was significant. Morale was dropping as crews began to question the nature of their enemy. Some officers were even suggesting that the humans might be infected with some kind of madness virus that made them incapable of rational surrender. General Tai Yang had begun a new phase of the resistance. Human forces were now attacking Corvani-occupied worlds, using tactics that Veltar found deeply disturbing. They targeted not just military installations, but also administrative centers, supply depots, and communication hubs. On New Sol, human guerrilla fighters had turned the entire civilian population into a weapon. Every building could hide a sniper. Every vehicle could be a bomb. Every communication device could be a relay for human intelligence networks. The Corvani occupation forces found themselves fighting an entire world rather than just its military. This violates all principles of civilized warfare. War Master Theclon complained during a strategy meeting. Civilians are supposed to be protected, not weaponized. But the humans seem to have different ideas about civilian protection. When the Corvani attempted to establish safe zones for non-combatants, the humans used those zones as cover for military operations. When the Corvani tried to separate military and civilian populations, the humans proved that such separation was impossible when the entire population supported the resistance. Veltar was beginning to understand that human warfare was not just about defeating enemies. It was about making conquest impossible even after military defeat. The humans were teaching the galaxy that some species could not be ruled, regardless of technological superiority. Dr. Yoonji's latest experiments were producing results that defied scientific explanation. Her teams had somehow created gravity bombs using modified mining equipment. The devices generated localized gravity fields that could crush Corvani ships from the inside out. When Corvani scientists analyzed the wreckage, they found that the bombs used principles of physics that should have required massive particle accelerators to achieve. They are doing graduate-level physics with undergraduate-level equipment, Veltar reported to his superiors. Either human intelligence is far greater than we estimated, or they are using scientific principles we do not understand. The truth was probably both. The humans had proven capable of innovation under pressure that exceeded anything in Corvani records. More importantly, they seemed to view scientific impossibility as a challenge rather than a limitation. Engineer Wanho exemplified this attitude. His latest creation was a communication system that used quantum entanglement to coordinate attacks across the entire system simultaneously. The technology should have been beyond human capabilities, but Wanho had built it using parts from destroyed Corvani ships and human industrial equipment. If their physics says it's impossible, Wanho explained to his team, then we need better physics, and if we cannot build better physics, we will fake better physics until the universe gives up and lets us have better physics. Veltar realized that he was no longer just observing a military conflict. He was watching two completely different approaches to reality and direct conflict. The Corvani believed in following established rules and principles. The humans believed in changing the rules when the rules were inconvenient, and the humans were winning the rule-changing contest. As the war entered its second month, Veltar found himself looking forward to each new development with something approaching excitement. These impossible creatures continued to surprise him with innovations that should not work, but did. He was beginning to suspect that his original mission might be impossible. How could he document humanity's defeat when humanity refused to be defeated? 2 months into what should have been a 3-day conquest, Veltar witnessed something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. The event began with a desperate human attack that seemed destined to fail spectacularly. Pilot Jihan was 22 years old and had been flying for only 6 months. His squadron consisted of 12 modified civilian craft that had been converted into fighters using spare parts and desperate ingenuity. Their target was the Corvani flagship Eternal Dominion, a battleship capable of destroying entire planets. Veltar watched the attack unfold with professional interest. Such an assault was clearly suicidal. The flagship's defensive systems could destroy hundreds of small craft without even charging its main weapons. Jihan's squadron would be eliminated long before they could inflict any meaningful damage. "This is Falcon Squadron," Jihan broadcast to his fellow pilots. "We all know this is a one-way trip. Remember why we're here. Remember who we're fighting for." The 12 human fighters began their approach through a storm of defensive fire. Corvani particle beams and missile systems turned space into a deadly web of energy. 3 human ships died in the first 30 seconds. 2 more exploded as they tried to navigate through the defensive grid. But something strange was happening. As each human ship was destroyed, the remaining fighters seemed to become more coordinated, not less. Their formation tightened and their movements became more precise. It was as if the destroyed ships were somehow still contributing to the attack. Veltar checked his sensors repeatedly, convinced his equipment was malfunctioning. The data showed impossible readings. The surviving human ships were sharing damage across their formation. When one fighter's shields failed, the others somehow compensated by reinforcing their own defensive fields. When a ship's weapons were damaged, its firepower seemed to transfer to the remaining vessels. "How are they doing this?" Veltar muttered, running every analysis program he had. Their technology cannot support networked consciousness or shared systems, but the humans were doing it anyway. Jihan's voice came over the comm channels, calm and determined despite the chaos around him. "Remember, we are not 12 separate ships. We are one ship with 12 bodies. When one of us falls, the rest grow stronger. 7 ships remained, then 5, then 3. Each loss seemed to increase the effectiveness of the survivors. The remaining fighters were moving in perfect coordination, responding to threats before they fully materialized. Their weapons fire was precise beyond anything human technology should have allowed. War Master Theklan watched from the flagship's bridge in growing alarm. "How are 3 primitive fighters penetrating our defense grid? Their weapons should not even scratch our armor." But the human weapons were doing more than scratching. Jihan's remaining fighters had somehow synchronized their firing patterns to create focused energy bursts that overwhelmed local shield segments. They were using their primitive projectile weapons to punch holes in defenses that had withstood attacks from entire fleets. Down to 2 ships now, Ji-hun made his final approach to the flagship's bridge. His wingman, a pilot named Soo-jin, was flying beside him despite having lost half her ship to a direct hit. Both fighters were trailing debris and plasma, but they continued their impossible attack run. "Soo-jin, it's been an honor," Ji-hun said over the comm. "Save the speeches for after we win," she replied, then deliberately crashed her crippled fighter into the flagship's primary weapon array. The explosion disabled the ship's main guns just as Ji-hun reached the bridge section. Veltar watched Ji-hun's final moments with something approaching awe. The young pilot was singing as he prepared to ram the command center. The song was in the human language, but Veltar's translation systems recognized it as something called a war hymn. "For everyone who comes after us," Ji-hun sang, then drove his fighter directly into the flagship's bridge. The explosion was relatively small by the standards of space warfare, but it accomplished something that should have been impossible. The Corvani flagship, pride of the hegemony fleet, was dead in space with its command crew eliminated, and its primary systems offline. 12 converted civilian craft had destroyed the most powerful warship in the Corvani Navy. Veltar sat in stunned silence as emergency crews worked to restore the flagship systems. Around him, his recording equipment continued to document the impossible victory, but his mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing the intercepted communications, Veltar discovered a conversation between an elderly human named Elder Yoon and a young military commander called Da-un. The discussion had taken place just hours before the attack and revealed something that shattered Veltar's understanding of human psychology. "Commander Da-un," Elder Yoon had said, "you seem troubled by the casualties we are taking. We're losing so many people, Elder, good people, brave people. Sometimes I wonder if resistance is worth the cost." Elder Yoon's response contained words that would haunt Veltar for the rest of his life. "Child, you misunderstand what we are doing here. We are not fighting to win this war. We are fighting to ensure that someone else can win the next war. I don't understand. Every human who dies fighting the Corvani teaches the galaxy something important. We teach them that some species cannot be conquered. We teach them that freedom is worth dying for. We teach them that the strong can be defeated by the determined." Elder Yoon continued, his voice filled with certainty. "When we are gone, other species will remember what we did here. They will know that the Corvani can be hurt. They will know that resistance is possible. Our deaths will become seeds that grow into rebellions across the galaxy." Commander Da-un's voice was quiet when she replied, "So we fight not for ourselves, but for species we will never meet?" "Exactly. This is what it means to be human. We do not fight for our own survival. We fight for the survival of the idea that freedom matters more than safety." Veltar replayed the conversation several times, each listening revealing new depths of meaning. The humans were not just fighting a military campaign. They were fighting an ideological war across time itself. Every sacrifice was an investment in the future freedom of species that might not even exist yet. This concept was completely alien to Corvani thinking. The hegemony fought for conquest, resources, and expansion. Individual Corvani fought for personal glory, advancement, and survival. The idea of fighting for abstract principles that would benefit unknown future generations was literally incomprehensible to Corvani psychology. But the results spoke for themselves. Human tactics that seemed insane from a Corvani perspective were actually sophisticated psychological warfare designed to demonstrate that conquest was not inevitable. Every human victory, no matter how small, proved that the mighty could fall to the determined. Veltar began to understand why the human attack patterns seemed so chaotic. They were not trying to achieve tactical objectives in the traditional sense. They were trying to create examples. Every impossible victory, every successful innovation, every demonstration of human determination was a message being broadcast to the entire galaxy. The message was simple: you can fight back. Dr. Yoonji's research projects made sense now. She was not just developing weapons to fight the Corvani. She was developing techniques that other species could use when they faced similar invasions. Her gravity bombs, quantum viruses, and shield-penetrating rounds were templates that could be adapted by any civilization with sufficient desperation and creativity. Engineer Wanho's impossible inventions were not just desperate attempts to level the playing field. They were proof-of-concept demonstrations, showing that superior technology could be overcome through innovation and determination. Every device he created was a lesson in turning weakness into strength. Admiral Hyunwoo's strategy of trading ships for information was not just military necessity. It was a systematic effort to learn everything possible about Corvani capabilities and weaknesses. The knowledge gained from each sacrifice would be transmitted to human colonies and other systems, and eventually to other species facing Corvani conquest. Veltar realized that he was not just observing a war. He was witnessing the birth of a galactic resistance movement. The humans were using their own conquest as a teaching tool, showing the entire galaxy how to fight back against seemingly impossible odds. And they were doing it by turning their greatest weakness into their greatest weapon. The humans could not match Corvani technology or numbers, but they could demonstrate something far more powerful: the idea that freedom was worth any sacrifice. As Veltar watched the disabled flagship being slowly repaired, he found himself facing a choice he had never expected to confront. His mission was to document human defeat and analyze their capabilities for future reference. But the humans were not being defeated in any meaningful sense. They were transforming their losses into victories on a scale that transcended individual battles. The question was no longer whether the Corvani would conquer humanity. The question was whether humanity had already conquered something far more important than territory or resources. They had conquered the idea that conquest was inevitable. 4 months after the war began, Veltar received an urgent message from Corvani High Command. The contents filled him with dread and confusion in equal measure. Observer Veltar, report immediately on the status of human resistance activities in sectors beyond the Sol system. We are receiving disturbing reports from across the galaxy. Veltar quickly accessed the galactic communication networks and discovered what had alarmed his superiors. Human tactics and technologies were appearing on dozens of worlds facing Corvani conquest. Species that had never heard of humans were suddenly using gravity bombs, quantum viruses, and shield-penetrating rounds. More disturbing, they were adopting human, psychological warfare techniques and resistance strategies. The humans had somehow turned their invasion into a university course on rebellion. Admiral Seok-jin commanded the remnants of the human fleet from a hidden base in the asteroid belt. His forces had been reduced to fewer than 50 ships, but those ships were now more dangerous than the original fleet of 300. Every vessel had been rebuilt using captured Corvani technology and human innovation. Dr. Min Seo, what is the status of Project Liberation? Admiral Seok-jin asked during a strategy meeting that Veltar managed to intercept. Dr. Min Seo was a brilliant scientist who had replaced Dr. So-min after her death. Her research focused on what the humans called cultural warfare. Admiral, we are ready to deploy the final package. But I want to be clear about what this means. Once we release it, there will be no controlling the consequences. Explain. We have created something that attacks more than Corvani technology. It attacks Corvani thinking patterns themselves. The virus will spread through their quantum networks. But instead of destroying their systems, it will expose them to human cultural concepts. Veltar listened with growing alarm as Dr. Min Seo explained her creation. The humans had somehow weaponized their own philosophy. The virus would carry data about human history, art, music, and most dangerously, their concepts of individual freedom and self-sacrifice. Every Corvani who comes into contact with the virus will be exposed to human ideas about resistance, hope, and the value of fighting for principles rather than survival. Dr. Min Seo continued. We cannot predict how they will react to concepts that are completely foreign to their psychology. Admiral Seok-jin was quiet for a long moment. And if this works, if we can make the Corvani think like humans, then conquest becomes impossible not just here but everywhere. How do you rule a population that believes freedom is worth dying for? How do you maintain an empire when your own soldiers start questioning the morality of conquest? The plan was audacious beyond anything Veltar had observed. The humans intended to infect the entire Corvani fleet with their own ideology. It was not just warfare. It was attempted cultural transformation on a galactic scale. War Master Teklan was unaware of the human plan as he prepared for what he intended to be the final assault on Earth. The flagship had been repaired and reinforced. Additional fleets had arrived from other sectors. The Corvani now had enough firepower to sterilize every planet in the Sol system. We end this today. Teclon announced to his commanders. No more games. No more human tricks. We destroy everything and start over with a lifeless system. But as the Corvani fleet approached Earth for the final battle, Dr. Minseo activated her weapon. The cultural virus spread through the quantum networks faster than any defensive system could respond. Within minutes, every Corvani ship in the system was infected. Veltar felt the virus reach his own observation post. His analytical system suddenly flooded with data about human history, philosophy, and culture. He experienced human concepts of love, sacrifice, hope, and resistance as if they were his own memories. For the first time in his existence, Veltar understood what it meant to fight for something greater than survival. The effect on the Corvani fleet was immediate and devastating. Crews that had never questioned orders began debating the morality of their mission. Officers who had always followed established protocols started making decisions based on conscience rather than regulation. On the flagship bridge, War Master Teclon stared at his tactical displays in confusion. Why are my crews hesitating? The attack order was clear, but his crews were no longer capable of simple obedience. The human virus had given them access to concepts that made blind following impossible. They were learning to think for themselves, and thinking beings questioned orders that seemed wrong. Captain Bo-Ra chose that moment to lead the final human counterattack. Her small fleet of upgraded ships emerged from hiding places throughout the system. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but they were facing an enemy fleet that was fighting itself as much as it was fighting them. All human ships. This is Captain Bo-Ra. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for the future of freedom in the galaxy. Remember, we are not trying to destroy the Corvani. We are trying to liberate them. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. Corvani ships fired on each other as crews divided between those embracing human concepts and those trying to resist them. Some vessels simply stopped fighting altogether as their commanders grappled with newfound ideas about the value of life. Veltar watched a Corvani destroyer captain refuse any order to bombard civilian targets on Earth. The captain's message to his superiors was, broadcast on open frequencies, I have seen human memories of children playing in gardens. I cannot destroy gardens where children play. The cultural virus was spreading beyond simple military paralysis. Corvani crew members were experiencing human emotions like empathy, compassion, and protective love. These concepts were foreign to their psychology, but they were also compelling in ways that Corvani minds had never imagined. Admiral Seok Jin coordinated the human fleet's advance through the chaos of the Corvani formation. His ships were no longer trying to destroy their enemies. Instead, they were broadcasting messages of welcome to any Corvani who wanted to stop fighting. To our Corvani brothers and sisters, Admiral Seok Jin transmitted, you do not have to be our enemies. The virus has shown you what we fight for. You can choose to fight for it too. War Master Teclon made one final desperate attempt to restore order. All ships, purge your quantum networks immediately. Eliminate all traces of the human contamination. But it was too late. The cultural virus had already transformed too many minds. When Teclon ordered his remaining loyal ships to fire on vessels that had been infected, the order was met with mass mutiny. Engineer Wanho had built one final surprise into the virus. As it spread through the Corvani networks, it carried not just human culture, but also technical specifications for every innovation the humans had developed during the war. Corvani engineers suddenly had access to gravity bomb designs, quantum virus templates, and shield-penetrating technologies. More importantly, they understood why these innovations had been created. They were not weapons of conquest but tools of liberation. Every design came with its own philosophical context explaining how oppressed peoples could use technology to resist superior forces. The war ended not with a great battle, but with a choice. War Master Teclon found himself commanding a fleet, where half his ships refused to fight and the other half were actively helping the humans. He could continue the conflict and watch his forces destroy each other, or he could accept the impossible. Teclon chose to retreat. All loyal vessels withdraw to the edge of the system. We will reconsider our approach to this species. But Veltar knew the retreat was meaningless. The cultural virus was already spreading beyond the Sol system, through the quantum networks that connected all Corvani forces. Within days it would reach every corner of the hegemony. The infection was designed to be irresistible and irreversible, Admiral Hyunwoo broadcast a final message as the Corvani fleet limped away from Earth. To all species listening across the galaxy, remember what happened here. Remember that freedom is possible. Remember that the strong can be defeated by the determined. And remember that every species deserves the right to choose its own destiny. Veltar faced his own choice as he prepared his final report. He could document the human victory as a temporary setback that the hegemony would eventually overcome. Or he could tell the truth about what he had witnessed. He chose the truth. Final report from Observer Veltar. He began recording. The human species cannot be conquered because they do not fight for conquest. They fight for principles that transcend individual survival. They have transformed their own defeat into a victory that will echo across the galaxy for generations. Recommendation: the Corvani hegemony should abandon all attempts to conquer humanity. More importantly, we should learn from them. They have shown us something we never knew existed: the power of fighting for others rather than for ourselves. Veltar submitted his report, and then made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of returning to Corvani space, he requested permission to remain in the Sol system as a cultural exchange observer. His request was denied, but it did not matter. Veltar had already been infected with human ideas about individual choice and personal freedom. For the first time in his life, he chose to disobey orders. Months later, Veltar established the first Corvani Human Cultural Center on one of Jupiter's moons.